4.4, solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So up at the top here, we have completing the square. In words, we have 3 steps. So first of all, it says we're going to find 1/2 of our b value. Then we're going to square whatever that is. And then we're going to add that result to the end of our expression. So let's actually go look at what they're talking about here. First of all, before we can solve anything, we need to figure out by what they mean complete the square. So they're asking us to complete the square for the expression x squared plus 6x, and then they want us to factor the trinomial. So we're going to look at this in 2 different ways. We're first going to look at the picture, like what's going on in the picture, and then we're going to look at it using algebra. So if I'm looking at the picture, we're starting with an x squared plus 6x. So back in the day, at one point in time, you had these things called algebra tiles. And if we have an x squared is x by x, so I'm going to draw my x squared, which is x by x, which when you multiply x by x, that could get you an x squared. Now, we're going to add to that 6 x's. Okay, so these are just x's, they're not x squareds. And an x would look like this. So the length of this thing is x, and the width of this thing is 1. So that's 1x, x by 1. And I need 6 of these. So 1, 2, 3. And that's x, 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 which is 1, 1. Okay, because 1 by x for all of them. But that's only 3, and I need 3 more. So I'm going to put the other 3 down here. So 1, 2, 3, which gives me x, 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 which is 1, 1, 1, because now I've got 1 by x up here. So at the moment, if I'm looking at this, I have x squared, that's my blue one, plus 6 x bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, it says that we have to complete the square. Well, if you look at this, it's kind of a funny looking thing, but it's not a square. And if I want to make it a square, I have to fill in the rest of it. So I have to fill in this part down here to make a square. And the question would be, well, what do I have to put there in order to make it a square? I'm going to put all these little boxes. I'm going to put one here, and one here, and one here, and one here, 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 here. And now if I look at my big thing, I have this nice square. And the question is, well, what did I add? I added 1 by 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I added 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In order to complete the square. Now that my square is completed, it says that I have to factor the trinomial. So notice I took my binomial, which was x squared plus 6x, I added 9 to it to complete the square, so now I have a trinomial and they want me to factor that. Well, if I'm looking at the picture, it's actually not that bad, because if I look at this side over here, that's x plus 1, 2, 3. And if I look at this side over here, because this is in fact a square, this is also x plus 1, 2, 3, which makes a square. So if I factor this, I'm going to have x plus 3 times x plus 3, which more importantly, I can write as x plus 3 squared. Now, let's look at what the algebra of that actually looks like, which are the steps that were outlined below. So we have x squared plus 6x. That's what we're starting with, and they want us to complete the square. So anytime you're completing the square, we're going to put a plus blank on the end of this because I have to add something on to complete the square. Step 1, it told us to take the b value and cut it in half. So remember, this is ax squared plus bx plus c. So I'm going to take my b value, I'm going to cut it in half, which gives me 3. Now, I always circle that. It's important. It's going to come back later. Then it tells us to take that value and square it. So if we take 3 squared, that's 3 times 3, which gives us 9. And then it says to add that value onto the end of our expression, which gives us x squared plus 6x plus 9, which is exactly how many of those little squares we had to add into our picture. that is completing the square. Now it says to factor the trinomial. So if I'm going to factor this, I'm going to set up my little graphic organizer. I'm going to take 9 times 1, which is 9. I'm going to take my middle value, which is 6. What multiplies to 9 but adds to 6? Well, that's 3 times 3. So I'm going to break down my middle term into a 3x plus a 3x. I'm going to drop down my 9 in the back. I'm going to drop down my x squared at the front. And then I'm going to move on to grouping. Out of the first two, I can take an x, which is going to leave me with an x plus 3. Out of the second two, I can take a 3, which is going to leave me with an x plus 3. And then out of both of those, I can take an x plus 3, which is going to leave me with an x plus 3, which means ultimately I can write my answer as x plus 3 squared. And as you can see, these turned out the same. Let's try a couple examples. Example 1, complete the square for each expression, then factor the trinomial. So letter A, x squared minus 4x. Now the first thing we have to do is we have to complete the square. So I'm going to add a blank. Now, if I'm following algebra, and we'll just look at a real quick picture here, I have an x squared, and I have negative 4x. So I would put 2 here, and I would put 2 here. Then I would have to complete my square. Well, in order to do that, I would need 1, 2, 3, 4 little squares. So I should be putting a plus 4 over here on this blue line. So I take my b value, I cut it in half. I have a negative 4, half of that is negative 2. I circle that. Then I square it. A negative times a negative is a positive, which is going to give me 4. And that is exactly how many little green dots we needed to add onto our picture to complete that square. Then I need to factor this. And remember how I said to circle this because it always comes back into play? Well, the reason it always comes back into play is because when you factor, you're going to have x, and then you know this minus 2 is just going to fall right into there, squared, and you're factored. And the way to look at this on your picture is you have an x, and then you have negative 1, negative 2, minus 2, and then you have an x, and then on your picture you have a negative 1, negative 2, minus 2, which gives us x minus 2 times x minus 2, which is x minus 2 squared. Or we could sit here and do it the long way like we did on the previous example, but I'm not going to do that. Letter C, x squared plus 10x. So on this one, we have an x squared, and then we have 10 x's. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'd have to fill in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Or you can think of it as 5 by 5. So I know that I should be putting a 25 on that line. Take your b value, cut it in half. Half of 10 is 5. Circle it, square it. 5 times 5, 25. And then factor. So x, and then that plus 5 or positive 5 just falls right into place. Squared, and you're factored. If you're looking at your picture, this is an x, and then plus 5 bars. This is an x, and then plus 5 bars, which is where we get the x plus 5 squared. Letter B, x squared minus 9x. Now, this time I'm going to kind of steer away from the picture because we're getting a little more complicated, and I'm going to go straight to algebra. So, plus blank, we have to add something to complete the square. This time my b value is a negative 9. Well, if I cut negative 9 in half, I'm not going to do decimals here. I'm going to do negative 9 halves. I'm going to circle that. Then I'm going to square it. Negative 9 halves times negative 9 halves. First of all, a negative times a negative is a positive. That's why this is always a plus blank. You should never have a minus blank. It's always plus blank because we're squaring it. And when you square it, the value is going to go positive. 9 times 9 is 81 2 times 2 is 4. So when we complete the square, we have x squared minus 9x plus 81 over 4. If you factor, it's x something squared, and then remember I tell you to circle this because it just falls right into place. Minus 9 halves, and this is your factor. Letter D, x squared plus 7x plus blank. Take your b value, cut it in half, 7 divided by 2. Again, I'm going to leave it as a fraction, and then we square it. 7 times 7 is 49. 2 times 2 is 4. X something squared, and it falls into place. That is a positive, so we put plus, and we're done.